Hey, what's up everybody? Bob DeBoo here for Open Studio. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to talk about altered dominants and how to use triad pairs inside of that. But before we talk about anything, let's just, I'm going to play a little bit and I'll try to express what it is we're going to work on today. So I'm going to pull up my iReal app and just play a loop that's going back and forth between C minor and G7 altered. So here's the C, which we're calling a 1. G7 altered would be like the 5, leading back to C minor, right? So it's literally this. So we've got the C minor, G7, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, right? But here's the type of sound that we're going to try to get into. Do you know what I mean? It's really, I'm thinking about the C minor. Let's talk about that first. Okay, the C minor, I'm not thinking about a full C minor scale when I play something like that. You can think about it however you want to, obviously, but I'm thinking about the first 5 notes of a C minor scale. Here's just C minor with no 7ths, not even thinking about 6ths. I'm thinking about this. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's listen to how that sounds against this chord. The root, obviously that sounds grounded, right? The 3rd is obviously in that chord. The G is of course in that chord as well. A little less common, but what about the other notes that we're choosing? That 9th, or the D natural in this C minor, sounds really good. So we're going to leave that in there as an option for when we're playing on C minor and further down the road in our shedding. The next option that's in there is the 4th, which always sounds really nice on a minor chord, also a half diminished chord. So that's a good thing that we want to keep in there. So play around with this sound a little bit and we get something like this. You know, I encourage you to sit on that kind of chord for a while and really explore it, get into the sounds that you like, and then you can start finding some other options for maybe putting in some 6ths, 7ths, chromaticism, a bunch of different options. But that's not really the point of our video today. We're talking about triad pairs today, and we're going to deal with mainly this 5 chord, the altered dominant. Let's just describe what that is really quick. Firstly, the altered dominant. Let's talk about the dominant part first, okay? It is G7. What makes a G7 chord? It means the root. It means the 3rd, in this case B natural, and then an F, which is the 7th. So that's really all it takes to construct a G7 chord. Those 3 notes, right? That is what defines a G7. That kind of sound, right? Okay, so G7 altered. Quick and dirty way to think about this is just G7 altered means that every note that could be altered is altered. Okay, so that means flat 9s, flat 9, sharp 9, the flat 5, or you could call it sharp 11 if you really want to, the flat 13, and then it's got the dominant 7th that we already talked about too. So we get this kind of a sound over it. The most common way, the most common scale that people will use on this is this, literally the altered scale, which you're seeing on the screen now, which has all those alterations in it, right? So here's the root, here's the flat 9, here's the sharp 9, here's the 3rd, flat 5, flat 13, dominant 7th, and then the root again, of course, right? Okay, triad pairs. The quickest way to think about this is on a G7, we can think about the tritone, starting a major triad from the flatted 5th. So that means a D flat major triad. D flat, that's the flat 5 of that G7. F, of course, is the 7th of that G7. A flat is the flat 9. I know that sounds really nasty like that, you know, like having that flat 9. I kind of like it actually, but that's the idea. So let's hit this chord again and play around with the D flat major triad. So it doesn't give us a lot of options if we're just thinking about the D flat, which is why we're going to talk about the pairs of triads. But before we do that, add back in those other notes from the G7. So add into this D flat triad, G natural, and also B. Let's see what that sounds like. So we get something like this. So it sounds a little bit more grounded. It sounds like we're playing the sound, and it gives us some other notes that really work well in there. So play around with that. Marinate on the sound for a minute. Here is a good way just to practice your triads if this is new to you. If we're thinking about just playing a root position triad, D flat, F, A flat, totally cool. First inversion, F, A flat, D flat, also totally cool. Second inversion would start on the 5th, A flat. Cool, so that gives you some different shapes. But here is a pattern that I like working on. We're thinking about it in root position first, but we're starting at the top. Starting at the top, 5, root, 3rd, 5. And then do the same thing where you do it in first inversion. So, and then second inversion. So, that type of shape. Cool? So, sit on that G7, play around with that sound, add in G natural and B natural, and see what that feels like. Let's add in the next triad that we think about, which is only a whole step higher than that D flat. So of course that's E flat, the E flat major triad. Let's break that down for a minute. E flat is that flat 13 of G7, right? G, which is the 3rd of the E flat major triad, is of course the root of G7. So no dispute there, I'm sure. B flat is the 5th of the E flat major triad, but in this case, it is the sharp 9. The 9th of G, the natural 9th of G would be A. But if you raise that by a half step, you could call it A sharp. I'm going to call it B flat. You could call it either. It depends on how it sounds. So that E flat triad, flat 13, root, sharp 9. That's what that gets you. Let's play with that sound real quick. So here is just the E flat triad. And let's break it down the same way that we did with that D flat major triad. That type of shape, right? So I'm thinking root position, first inversion, second inversion, right? And it's got those altered sounds in there. Let's add back in what we were doing with the D flat. We've already got G in this, but add in B natural to this and F. And let's see what happens now. So we've got the E flat major triad. But what if we put that B on top? Let's do that one first. Sounds good, right? It's got that little half-step chromatic thing in there. It's a nice rub on top of the sound because it's both the 3rd and the sharp 9. But I'm just thinking E flat. What if we added in the F natural too? Remember that's the 7th of G7. So it's some good sounds in there just by slightly expanding from the triad pairs idea and adding back in those core notes that are in the chord. Again, the 3rd and the 7th, and also the root, so it sounds grounded. Okay, so let's put those two triads together. Now E flat, same idea. D flat in first inversion. And I'm saying first inversion because the lowest note is the 3rd, okay? E flat in first inversion. D flat in second, A flat, the 5th of D flat is on the bottom. That's the lowest note right now, so that's why it's second inversion. E flat in second. So all together. that gives us all of that in there, right? Let's think of it a slightly different way now. What if, instead of thinking E flat major, we just took out that B flat and made it an augmented triad? It can give us a really interesting type of sound, and it would sound like this. So I'm thinking D flat in root position. Now E flat augmented in in root position. So the augmented triad again is just the fifth raised by a half step. So E flat, G, and B natural. And instead of having that B flat in there, we're excluding that and keeping the B natural in there. So you could try it like this. And it gives you an interesting kind of sound. Let's put that with the chord again and see what that sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty cool, right? Let's just play around with it. Cool. So that was me thinking D flat major triad and the E flat augmented triad. They both sound really good over this G dominant altered chord. Okay, so now how can we practice stuff like this? So earlier on in the video I was playing some lines going back and forth between the C minor sound and the G7 altered sound, right? That's where we want to get this work in. So here's a little loop to do just that. We're going to think C, C minor to G7 altered, right, with these triads. C, G7. Now that can be kind of daunting if this is newer, to think about, oh, okay, there's all that information I want to put on the G7 altered, right? Let's break it down to just thinking about this. Here's C minor, and instead of thinking both of those triads, just think D flat major triad right there. So this is C minor, and then D flat major triad, and you can get stuff that sounds like this. Right? And so that kind of pares it down a little bit. So it's still, the chords are C minor to G7, but we're tritone subbing in our minds that triad, the D flat triad. So just practice that back and forth, and I'll include this a play along that you can practice along with. You can also get the PDF. Just click this link downstairs. It's all free. You got to fill in your email and it's yours. So, and if you're into this, we practice stuff just like this at the Bass Access Pass here at Open Studio every week. And it's a great community online of bass players from all over the world where we practice stuff just like this. So consider joining us. Check it out, at least. Okay, so since we were just thinking C minor to D flat, couldn't we do the same thing where we're just practicing going back and forth between C minor and E flat? But let's think E flat augmented, perhaps. Let's try it out. So there's that G7. Here's C. Now the E flat augmented. Remember those ninths and the 11ths on the C minor sound really good. So bring those out and see where the differences are between those two chords, right? So this is G7 right here. That type of idea, you know, just going back and forth between the two. What if we took that E flat augmented and brought back in the B flat? So thinking E flat major triad, but with also the B natural in there too. It might sound something like this. Something like that, you know what I mean, and playing back and forth between it. And you really want to try to highlight the difference in the sounds from on C minor hitting this D natural which sounds like it can't be that G7 altered sound, right? The F can be, and that can be kept through both chords, like this. As can the E flat. So you can keep these common notes between the two chords too, and kind of ride those out and just play with the differences. Find those little differences where the cracks are between the chords, and it's a lot of fun. All right. So if we just go back and forth now, thinking all of those ideas, you might end up with something like this. Here's that 5 chord. Here's C minor. That's all. C minor. I especially like the sound of the D flat major triad and the E flat augmented. Or you can also just think G altered. I'm sorry, not altered, but G augmented. It's the exact same. So you could think D flat major triad and G altered. I keep saying altered. The G augmented triad, like this. Here's C, D flat. It's the same thing basically. They're inharmonically spelled, right? So that's a fun thing you can do. This is, it's a lot of information, but I'm trying to show you a good way to practice it. Go back and forth thinking the 1 to the 5, the 1 to the 5. And of course, this is just in one key at one tempo. You have to transpose this. Think about where it's at, say if we're in F minor, B flat minor. Hit all those keys for sure. But I just wanted to put this out there as a concrete way to practice altered dominance using triad pairs. Hope you find it useful. If you do, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions, please comment below as well. If I got anything wrong in this, or you hear like there's something I left out, please let me know. All ears. I'm always trying to get better, and just keep practicing, and that's the idea. So again, my name is Bob DeBoo here for Open Studio. Thanks for watching, and happy practicing.